you for joining with me. We are on day 48, which is review of chapter 2, the second half, starting from section 8. If you will please close your eyes and join me in a prayer. Dear God, please enable me to set aside everything I think I know about the readings today, about you, about myself, about others, about this world. God, please allow me to have your vision, an open mind, and a new experience with these readings, with this world, with you, myself, and others, all encompassing. I thank you, God. Help me to be a conduit of your love today. Amen. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is read Emily's notes and Robert's comments from the past, from day 41. So I'm going to I hope that glare's not, oops, all right, so section 8, the sole responsibility of the miracle worker. So the overview of this section is the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept atonement himself, which denies our mind any destructive potential, thus placing us in a position to undo the level confusion of others. So paragraph 10 notes that the healing always rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the true perfection of another, even if he cannot perceive it himself. What this means is that our job as miracle workers is to look at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishment in time. If you're being honest, how charitable are you normally when viewing yourself and others? Healing always rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the true perfection of another, even when he cannot perceive it himself. So we should look at all others as if they had already gone far beyond their actual accomplishment of time, in time. So for those you are with today, repeat the phrase, I perceive the true perfection in you. Whoever's listening, I perceive the true perfection in you, even if you cannot perceive it in yourself. I love you. Key passages of this section. We have established that for all corrective processes, the first step is to know that this is fear. All forms of not right-mindedness are the result of refusal to accept atonement for yourself. Nothing which the spiritual eye perceives can induce fear. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need to correct forcibly into awareness. I just want to interject here as we move on to day 42, section 9, that Emily Bennington and Robert Perry often post videos on the Course Companions and Facebook, so please check them out if you have not already. They're very insightful. Day 42, the correction of fear. Today's commentary is written by Robert Perry, who's the editor. What we typically do with fear when we are afraid, and the Course says we are afraid to some degree all the time. And so when we're afraid, we think it's involuntary. It is just a reaction that arises in us on an almost physical level, like the urge to throw up, over which we have no control. This leaves us with only two things we can do. First, we can ask Jesus to take our fear away, just like we might ask him to remove a physical illness. Second, we can cover up the fear. We can put a lid on it and try to behave constructively in spite of it. even though we aren't responsible for the fear. So we think we definitely are responsible for our behavior. Hopefully, if we can sufficiently prevent the fear from leaking through in our behavior, we might even be able to behave in a healing way towards others. Does this not describe us? It absolutely describes me. So the real cause of fear. I spent so many years trying to understand what this section in the FIP edition of the course was saying about the cause of fear. Finally, while working on this edition, I noticed a brief parenthetical remark in the original dictation of the next section. Here Jesus speaks of people being afraid of their homicidal wishes. I'm not having a good reading day. Given those wishes, he says, they can choose only between homicide, expressing the wishes, and fear. See previous notes on will conflicts. The previous notes on will conflicts is our current section. Here, then, was a direct answer as to what this section is saying about the cause of fear. The fear comes from trying not to express a murderous thought or any loveless thought. We are afraid of that thought, afraid of its presence in us, and afraid of it getting out. Once you have that concept, this current section becomes a lot clearer. And I can say that I can certainly see a lot of rage in me at times. And I know that, and I get it, but it's, anyway. So let's look at this key passage. Only your mind can produce fear. It does so whenever it is conflicted what it wills, thus producing inevitable strain because willing and doing become discordant. Conflicted in what it wills means it has loveless impulses and more constructive impulses, and it's afraid of the former getting out and doing damage. Do you see how this makes sense of those two scenarios in paragraph 6 in which the will to do conflicts with what you do? In both cases, we have that conflicting will. We want to love, behave as you think you should, and we want to attack. In the first case, we alternate between bottling up the urge to attack and letting it rip. In the second case, we keep the urge consistently tucked away, expressing only our loving urge. It takes a lot of strain to do this, but there are some who can pull it off, mostly grandmothers. I love that. Can't you feel the fear in both these scenarios? In both cases, you have this murderous hand that wants to lunge out and choke everyone. Whether you always keep it under control or sometimes let it out to play, how can you not be in a state of fear? Here is the hard part. Can we accept that this is what causes all of our fear? The real solution to fear. Throughout this section, Jesus is clear that fear is not outside our control. It is produced by our thoughts, by a willingness on the part of our separated mind, by our tolerance for the miscreations of our wandering mind, by the fact that we must have willed not to love somehow or somewhere. And I find most of it self-directed. It's obviously, it's all self-directed, being projected out, but I can so feel that. Therefore, we must address the fear itself. Covering it up doesn't work. Asking Jesus to magically remove it doesn't work. What do? We begin by admitting that what we're feeling is fear. Then we acknowledge that fear arises from lack of love. Again, it's ultimately our own lovelessness that we are afraid of. And then we choose to accept the atonement, which is being perfect love, which undoes the lovelessness within us. Accepting the atonement can take many forms, but they come down to letting go of our loveless thoughts and choosing love to take their place. The practice in chapter 148, which he references here in paragraph 11, is one way. Another way is the prayer in paragraph 14. This prayer, which has long been a favorite of some of us in the course, was given to Bill at the very time this section was being dictated, and clearly includes a number of the key themes from this section. That's what I'll be doing today. I have the prayer printed out in front of me on a little paper tent I've made, and I'll be practicing it throughout the day, even though I have practiced it many, many times over the years. I think it will mean something quite new to me today in light of the teaching in this section. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and read that prayer. So just bear with me and I will find it. I love this prayer too. Okay. I would like to pray that my will be united with thine, recognizing that thy perfect love will suffice for my imperfect love. I pray that I may accept the atonement with conviction, recognizing its I can't never say this word, inestimable worth. I think I said it wrong, but in my own divine worth as part of this identification with thine. I pray that my fear be replaced by an active sense of thy love and thy continual willingness to help me overcome the split or divided will which is responsible for my difficulty with this. I accept the divinity of the messages I have received and affirm my will in both accepting and acting upon the atonement principle. Here I am. Thank you. All right, to return to the reading. Day 43, Section 10, The Real Power of the Mind. Overview. Our thoughts, far from being idle, have tremendous power. So much power, in fact, that we prefer to deny the mind's true ability because we are literally afraid of it. Jesus wants us to harness and use the power of the mind in two key ways. First, he wants us to guard our thoughts as much of the time as possible so that we stop our minds from producing fear. We think fear just happens, but he makes it very clear here that fear is the result of our unguarded thoughts. Emotion doesn't just happen, it's the result of the thought. He is concerned not with how the mind does or doesn't manifest things. He's concerned with how it constantly produces our emotions. He implies that if we could just watch our thoughts all of the time, we would see exactly how they produce the fear that we live in. And if we can guard our thoughts all of the time, we can live free of that fear. Robert Perry. When you think of the real power of the mind, do you think of manifestation and visualizing? This is certainly how we've been trained in self-help and empowerment circles, but the Course never encourages us to use the power of our mind to obtain things you desire in the world. Jesus wants you to guard your thoughts so that you can help him save the world. In other words, he's not asking us to move from dysfunctional to functional thinking. He's asking us to move from functional to miraculous. At which end of this scale do you see yourself and why? In paragraph 8 of this section, Jesus notes that he doesn't intervene between our thoughts and their results, which are emotions, because it would be tampering with the basic law of cause and effect. He goes on to say that his goal is not to depreciate the power of our thinking, but to remind us to guard our thoughts carefully so that we can be miracle workers and avoid miscreating. How carefully would you say you guard your thoughts? Experiment with watching your mind today and write down what you discover. Key passages. The mind is a very powerful agent. It never loses its creative force. It never sleeps. Every instant it is making or creating, and always as you will. You who complain about fear still persist in producing it most of the time. Fear cannot assail unless it has been elected. The basic conflict. This section states that above the miracle level, which is our root impulse to express love, there is a whole world of the unconscious or unwatched mind that is the source of fright. This is one of those sections in the course that spends a fair amount of time discussing psychology, which may or may not be of interest to you. Either way, we're in section 11, the basic conflict. I wasn't sure if I read that. Either way, it seems the overarching theme here is that we leave our minds quite unguarded most of the time. And Jesus is asking us, which is the theme all throughout this, to pay close attention to our thoughts. While he recognizes that we cannot engage in constant thought watching, the idea is that we can guard our thinking far better than we do it at the present. So do you get that yet? How well would you say you do this? In other words, how well do you strike a balance between consciously watching your mind and rejecting egoic, which are wrong-minded or loveless thinking or thoughts? Key passage. The unwatched mind is responsible for the whole content of the unconsciousness which lies above the miracle level. Now we are on same section, 11, the basic conflict. These are paragraphs 10 through 22. So the overview. Here we learn that the title of this section, the basic conflict, boils down to the conflict between creation and miscreation, which essentially means love and fear. That's all there is, love or fear. The idea that these two forces, one destructive and one miracle working, are both present in our minds and are contending against each other, splitting our minds into two opposing camps. Miscreation is a genuine creative act in terms of the underlying impulse, but not in terms of the content of what is made. What this means is that there is creative power, at least in this world terms, for our miscreation, but its nature or content doesn't reflect true creativity, which is loving. As you examine your relationships, would you say that they are defined more by love or fear? Note that this includes not just your own feelings of fear, but any actions that you take to induce fear in others. If you find you are acting lovelessly toward yourself and or certain people, what is this costing you in terms of your own peace and miracle working ability? What is required to move from this form of conflict in your life? Key passages. The only way out is to stop miscreating now and accept the atonement for miscreations of the past. Only this can reestablish true single-mindedness. That's 16:4. The instinct for creation is not obliterated in miscreation. That's 21:4. Moving on in our review, day 46 was the mastery of love, section 7. Overview. You can't control your own fear by attempting to master it. What this means is that since fear is really nothing and love is really everything, and since these concepts cannot coexist in your mind, the way to alleviate fear rests entirely on the mastery of love. Do you spend more time trying to master your fear or master your love? We are well conditioned to focus on the fear. How is it going to affect me? What if I don't have enough? But this section teaches that fear cannot be forced into submission. It dissolves only as a byproduct of turning your attention to miracle-mindedness. Accordingly, what does mastery of love within the context of the Course look like to you? Just as a musician must master his scales or a basketball player must master her drills, how would you apply this concept to your everyday experience? Key passages. Confidence cannot develop fully until mastery has been accomplished. Mastery of love necessarily involves a much more complete confidence in the ability than you have as yet attained. Readiness, however, is at least an indication that you believe this is possible. Section 13, the real meaning of the Last Judgment. The commentary for this review is from Robert Perry, editor of the complete and annotated edition of A Course in Miracles. In this section, we see Jesus' genius for reinterpreting conventional concepts. He's right that the final judgment is one of the greatest concepts in humanity's perception. How could it not be? We all realize that we have thought and done many selfish and hurtful things, probably many more than we have allowed ourselves to remember. What then could be more terrifying than to think that when it's all said and done, we have to stand trembling before God while He looks with merciless objectivity on our lives and decides whether He will throw us into the lake of eternal fire? It's like the prospect of being thrown off the island on a reality TV show taking to a cosmically horrific extreme. Jesus takes this concept and provides us with a deeply compassionate reinterpretation. No, it's not that God judges what people have done and chucks the bad souls into hell. It's that we ourselves evaluate our thoughts and deeds and simply discard our miscreations, which will then no longer exist. The result is unbelievably positive. We will be left with a mind filled only with the pure and loving that we have thought and done. We will finally understand what is worthy and what is not. Our imprisoned will at last be freed. We will depart from insanity and finally be restored to our right mind. With all our accumulated darkness dispelled, we will be left with a mind that shines like the sun. One thing I find very interesting about this reinterpretation is that you see a concrete reflection of this in near-death experiences. There, just at the moment that you might expect people to go before God and face His judgment in their lives, what happens instead is the well-known life review. Rather than being judged by God, NEDRs, near-death life experiencers, are surprised to find that they judge their own thoughts and deeds, not in a condemning sense, but in the sense we see here of understanding what is worthy and what is not. They learn that what was valuable was all those times they gave love, and that when they didn't, the only result was pain. Thus, just when so many expect to experience the terrifying traditional Last Judgment, they find themselves undergoing a compassionate educational process very much like what Jesus describes here. Of course, none of this was known back in the mid-60s when this was dictated. Yet we get the clear impression here that Jesus knew. All this sounds very reassuring, but I suspect we've forgotten something. Are we willing to start this process now? Are we willing to sort out the false from the true in our current thoughts, feelings, perceptions, actions, and behavioral patterns? Are we willing to look with dispassionate judgment on our lives as they currently stand and disown our miscreations? Or would we prefer to hang on to them and put the sorting out process off into some distant future? No doubt we do some of this simply by virtue of practicing the Course, but how far do we go? Jesus clearly wants us to get going because He needs individuals who will free themselves from fear sooner than would ordinarily be the case, so that they can speed up the process for the entire world. Are we willing to be one of those individuals? And that concludes our review. Thank you so much. I think this is, they broke down the review right here. And I'll just play this. I read them all, but go ahead and read it for yourself if you'd like. Fear comes from our own loveless thinking. Guard our thoughts throughout the day. Choose miracles rather than fear. You can certainly pause if I'm going too fast. Master love. It's not about mastering fear, it's about mastering love. Accepting love into our minds is like lighting a lamp in the darkness. Through these sections, we see two entirely different ways of dealing with the error within us. We can overlook the source of the error, our unwatched thoughts, assuming those thoughts are powerless, when they are in fact depositing more and more fear in our unconscious. Then when fear rises up to awareness as a seemingly involuntary force, we can try to master it enough that it doesn't overwhelm our functioning. All the while we are just ignoring the fact that the altar within is defiled. Like the Neo-Freudians, we are trying to act like the destructive energy that circulates through our unconscious is really not there. We are denying the error in us and indeed using all our psychological defense mechanisms to protect. And indeed using all of our psychological defense mechanisms to protect it. That's normal human life, isn't it? The solution again and again is to recognize the causative nature of the mental level. We need to face the fact that something has gone wrong, but also that it can be completely healed. This seems to be on two levels: the conscious, our present thinking, and the unconscious, in which our past miscreations are stored. In the present, we simply need to be guarding our thoughts all the time, using defense mechanisms in service of true thoughts, choosing love instead of fear. In terms of the unconscious, we need to look within and see the defiled altar and then accept the atonement, the perfect love, as the undoing of our past miscreations. This two-level process, guarding our present thoughts and accepting perfect love as what shines away our stored darkness, is the foundation on which we can be miracle workers in the world. We can only give miracles if we are living in a state of miracle-mindedness, and so it is. I love you. Thank you so much for joining with me. This is just awesome. Enjoy their videos on the Facebook page for Course Companions. Love you guys. Thank you so much for joining with me. I'm so grateful for this journey.